So back to talking about gifted, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I just want to refer to as placement. So I pre-wrote the characters and stuff because I wanted to describe where the story really begins, what year it is, and what all the main characters that we follow are doing. So as we see here, there are some characters that I haven't mentioned yet, and I'll go into detail about them. So right now, the good guys, I'll really put in blue, and then the people whose allegiances aren't obvious. Actually, calling them good guys actually doesn't do them any justice because they're all serving a different purpose. Yeah, let's not do that. Yeah, this isn't a story of like typical good and typical bad. Rather, all these characters have different motives and purposes of being there. So it's really hard to say which characters are good guys or not. We do start the story following off Sarai. We already mentioned that she's in sort of the ghetto in the USA East Coast. At this point in the story, she's about a junior in high school, so she's about 17 years old. Also, the story will begin at roughly the year 2001 or maybe 2004. I can't remember the exact setting. So this is supposed to be the early 2000s. But because of the Centurion incident, the technology is more like the 1990s. So imagine that look. I think everybody knows the look. A very awkward phase. I can't remember the exact math I've done, but if Ace was a protector of sorts during the time of the Centurion incident, he would be in his 50s to 60s. Now that's of course really old, that's retirement age, but again, because of Ace's physical abilities, he's pretty young. Garrett, on the other hand, again, this is really important to note that he is a protector, but military. Pretty much that means that he's not a protector per se, like Ace is, like a professional hero, but rather protector, this just really means protector nations. And he is just an army soldier. So if you think about it, if you want to draw a real world comparison, he's the military while Ace is the police. So Garrett at this point, he entered the military, he's roughly about 24 years old, and he's currently in a conflict with a Shadow Nation. Silvertongue, he's very influential to Sarai in the story. He's also on the East Coast, and that's how he finds her. Silvertongue, he's roughly in his late 20s, so I'd say about 28 years old. Datahead, I mentioned him earlier as one of the abilities. He is a professor in Europe, but he also does do some vigilante work himself. He, on the other hand, is also very old. He is in his 60s. Then you got Superbrain, extremely young, early 20s. Now, Superbrain's going to be very important. The story will already have him out as definitely not a good guy. His location is, or his profession is unknown, because as the story begins, you really don't know who he is. And of course, for most of you, these names don't really mean anything to you. You don't know who these people are. And I'll go and explain them in a minute. I'm just setting up their ages right now. Noel is roughly around, I'd say in his 40s. I'm trying to remember. And Jameson's completely new. He is actually one of the few main characters who has no gifts. So he is not gifted at all. And when he's in the story, he's in his 30 to 40s. Alright, now let's talk about who these people are so that nobody's confused. So Garrett, his backstory is he is an ungifted as well. As the story begins, raised in a family that's religious. And again, when we talked about the religions tend to take their own spin on gifts, and many religions despise gifts. So he was raised in a family that despised gifts, sort of saw them as curses. He enrolls in the military. A military action happens where he gets shot, but he is unharmed. And I think that this is a little bit of a spoiler, since I did mention it once, that how would a guy know if his skin is bulletproof unless he got shot at? And that's him. He gets shot, realizes that he was unharmed, finds out that he is actually gifted, and he is bulletproof. Now again, that only means that his ability works on high-speed projectiles. And also, it only makes him bulletproof. That means he's not immune to explosions and so forth, because that would just tear out his organs from the inside and all that. So what happens is, once he's discovered to be bulletproof, he is no longer a soldier, but rather gets the special assignment of becoming a bodyguard for Protector Nation's politicians. So that's his little story, where he begins and how he moves through the ranks. And when he becomes a bodyguard, that's how he becomes influential in the story. We already got Ace. We already know who he is. He's a protector. We know he teams up with Lex. We know that he's going to be important. I'm just going to leave him right there. Also, as the story develops, we know that his daughter died during the Centurion incident. That's important. Now we got Sarai, orphan, extremely gifted, or I would just say extremely powerful because of her gift. Extremely gifted. She originally, because her parents were killed, wants to become a cop. Or should I say protector, wants to become... So the difference between a cop and a protector is a cop is like low level, right? Anybody can do it, but you can't use your gifts. Protectors are authorized to use their gifts, and that's why there's a distinction. So it would be the difference between a SWAT team and policemen. Silvertongue, he is also extremely gifted. He's a mentalist, which means that his ability affects people's minds. He also encourages Sarai to... he really teaches her, teaches Sarai to use her power and exercise it. So pretty much what happens is Sarai, she's in school, she wants to use her powers, and so she encounters really a group of kids that uses it. That's when the first video I was talking about was doing it. And so as she uses her powers, she later finds out that her parents were killed by a hate crime. And what that means is her parents were killed because they were refugees. So now, rather than trying to become a protector, she then wants to go against the Protector Nations. Because she feels like her parents wouldn't have been killed if the rules weren't nearly as strict. The rules that forbid you from using your powers. And also, pretty much it's when Sarai reaches the point where she realizes she won't get certified because she's too powerful. You know, extremely gifted. And so that's when Silvertongue comes in, teaches her, pretty much encourages her. So he makes Sarai a vigilante. You know, she goes against the law. He pretty much instills in her the idea that society has turned their backs on the extremely gifted. I mean, even Ace, the poster child for gifted, isn't really that strong in the first place. And so he's helping her see that she won't be that helpful if she's a protector. Datahead, on the other hand, his main purpose in the plot is that he is an enemy to Superbrain. So I already mentioned that Superbrain is an enemy. Well, Datahead is the first guy who discovers him. So he discovers Superbrain. And they have similar powers. Datahead, again, his ability is that he sees physics. Whereas Superbrain's ability is that he can memorize anything instantly. So that means fighting styles, you name it. He can memorize anything instantly, and later, as the story is established, he's in his 20s. He already realizes that he not only just memorizes it, he can also teach himself it instantly. So that includes muscle memory. So let's say, you can read an entire book on Kung Fu, but Superbrain can read a book on Kung Fu, see it happen, and instantly be a master of that move that he saw. Pretty much instilling the muscle memory into his body. So they are similar but different in the same time. So what Superbrain can do, Datahead can't. What Datahead can do, Superbrain can't. Like Superbrain, he might be super smart, but he doesn't see the physics around him. So they're enemies. As the story progresses, of course, Superbrain defeats Datahead. And Datahead, he's sort of like this mentor-type figure. He's old, he's wise. But of course, he loses, right? And that's going to be important later in the plot. Don't want to spoil anything too much. That kind of was a spoiler right there, telling you that Datahead is eventually beat by Superbrain. But it's more obvious, as the story goes. Null, he's a crime boss. He actually helps Superbrain with his ability. So Superbrain can memorize anything, right? So he starts running out of memory, so forth. He starts suffering, really bad, what would it be called? Consequences. Yeah, he starts suffering really bad consequences because he overuses his power. And since Null, his ability is that he can make people forget things, is he can free up the power. So they have a shady alliance. And I say shady because it's not like they're the best of friends. It's rather Null helps him and he gets something out of Superbrain. They don't have the same ideals. He's a crime boss. He pretty much runs the child trafficking, but rather, again, this child trafficking is more like power trafficking. And finally, now we introduce Jameson, who is an enemy to Null and tries to take down his corporation on his own because his own child was taken into the trafficking. So this is like Liam Neeson's Taken movie, except instead going after the specific individual. Jameson, without gifts, that's the big thing, is he's more the underdog, whereas where you're watching Taken, you kind of see Liam Neeson as the overpowered guy. Rather, his child was taken, and since he doesn't have physical abilities, he's not going to use physical fighting. Rather, he's going to take it down logistically. What that means is like destroying supply lines, hacking, so on and so forth. And so this is why everything's important. As I explained it right now, you can already see some of the conflicts going on with Datahead, Superbrain, Null, and Jameson. But then what is also really interesting is Silvertongue works for Superbrain. Now this is going to get really nuts with all the connections going on. So you see Silvertongue works for Superbrain. Superbrain wants to take down Silvertongue wants to take down the Protector Nations, and since both Ace and Garrett work for the Protector Nations, that means they're going to have to fight against Superbrain. But also Sarai is trying to take down the Protector Nations, and so that's why she works in league with Silvertongue. So you have all these guys going together. Null, he doesn't care about the Protector Nations. He more cares about establishing his own thing. Neither does Jameson, so they're kind of the outliers. And so as you can see, everyone's connected either through the Protector Nations or through Superbrain. And that is the placement of all the characters and their character arcs as the stories progressed. This is a whole bunch of stuff, and this is me doing my best to hold back the spoilers, but this is where we get all the groups and different characters that we're going to follow throughout the story. And that'll be it for this episode.